I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe we are all self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delanie Fischer, and today I'm joined by Janice Kaplan, who is the New York Times Bestselling Author of The Gratitude Diaries, and we are chatting about the fascinating findings mentioned in her new book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness: How to Use Your Body to Change Your Mind. And I can't stress enough how fun this conversation was for me. I was like a kid in a candy store. So if you also like discovering new information about the human brain and body based on research studies you likely haven't heard about yet, and you enjoy quick, interesting nuggets that you can simply apply to your life, you are going to love this episode. A few examples, like, did you know whether you're holding a hot or cold drink impacts your perception of the person in front of you, or the wild discovery around college admissions based on the weather outside while someone's reading an application. Also, why a heavy clipboard and a hard chair might be vital for your next big meeting, and things like what colors to have in your environment to improve overall well-being. I mean, it was just so interesting. It's stuff I've never heard before. So get excited for some seriously piping hot tips. Here is my chat with Janice Kaplan. Janice, thank you so much for being here. I truly cannot put your book down. It is such an incredible curation of some of the most fascinating findings. So I would love to know what personally got you interested in the latest research and developments around the mind-body connection.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I like to have things that people can use. I like to have lots of research and information, but then things that you can actually figure out and make your life a little better with also. I wrote the Gratitude Diaries a few years ago, and that was a big New York Times bestseller. And the concept of that book was that I was spending a year living more gratefully. And it started out as a little bit of a literary device, won't this be fun? I'll spend a year living gratefully and see what happens.
Yeah.
And because I've always been a journalist, I did lots of research, spoke to psychologists and neurologists and all sorts of other people, and supported everything with research, which is something that I find really important to
Yes.
do. So you're not just getting my opinion. And the point of that book was very much that we can reframe situations. We can make our brains be more positive. We can learn to think about things in a more positive way. And I was pretty excited to find out that it made a huge change in my life. That, as I said, what started out as kind of a, oh, la-di-da, I'll try this, turned out to be something that really changed my life, my relationships, my everyday attitude. And then cut to a couple of years later, and I've obviously continued to think about this subject. And I started to realize that there are times when you just feel happy. You don't have to tell yourself to feel happy. You don't have to do any positivity tricks. You just all of a
Yeah.
sudden go, whoa, I'm really happy. And I happened to notice it one day when I'd had a terrible travel day. Everything that had gone wrong could go wrong. And we were going to an island. We ended up on a boat. And once we were on the boat, all of a sudden, I had that sense of things were just great. The sun was shining, the water was glistening beneath me. And I thought, what just happened? And I realized that my body was sending signals, that my body was telling my brain something, and it didn't have to work the other way around. So that really was the impetus for me to start thinking, okay, how do you flip this thing of happiness that we all talk about so much, turn it around and realize that sometimes it's from our bodies and not from our brains?
So true. The times where you just feel at ease, you're not having to give yourself a million affirmations in the mirror about it. It just happens, right? Have you found it's a mix of things, maybe what we're looking at, what we're listening to, what we're tasting or sensing? Is it a mix of things, or is there one kind of overarching thing?
It's a huge mix. So think
Yeah.
of it this way. We like to think of our brain as the big computer that's controlling everything. Your brain is basically a 3-pound mass that is stuck in a very dark skull, and it's not getting any input except from what you're giving it. And
Right.
that input is coming from all of your senses, from everything that's happening inside your body, from everything that's happening outside your body, from what, as you just said, you're tasting and touching and smelling and seeing and feeling and experiencing. And so all of that gets sent up to your brain, which is just basically there to try to make sense of it all. So I go through in the book all of the different ways that our brains are taking in this information and the many different kinds of signals that we can be sending them that can either make us miserable or make us happier.
I love that you debunked that in your book, by the way, that we're often told our brain is a computer and kind of whatever we think, this is what happens first, that triggers kind of everything else. And you're saying that it's often the opposite, or do you think it's always the opposite of our body is picking up on something and then that's kind of traveling to our brain?
Well, there's a great example that goes back probably 100 years where William James gave the example of if you're walking along and you encounter a bear. I guess we can change that. We can update that a little bit. I live in New York. If you're walking along and you encounter a dark alley,
Right.
um, your heart starts pounding and your hand is sweaty and you're scared. So he raised the question, is your heart pounding and your hand sweaty because you're scared? Or are you scared because your heart is pounding? Now, for most of us who are
Right.
very brain centric people, we go, well, that's easy. I'm scared. And so that makes my heart pound and I get all of the symptoms of being scared. But most of the new understanding of brain body connections say that it's the opposite, that we're obviously talking
Wow.
about milliseconds here, but that your body responds first, that your body starts to get that sweat, those sweaty palms and that pounding heart. And your brain, which is constantly scanning your body for information, goes, oh, pounding heart, sweaty palms. I guess we are scared here. And obviously, a
Wow. Yeah.
little faster than that. But people kind of shake their heads at that, go, that can't be. But we know that it happens with so many other things. If you touch a hot stove, you're going to pull your hand back before you can think about it. If you run into the street and a car is coming, you're going to dash back before you go, oh my goodness, that Toyota does look like it is bearing down on me.
Right. Right.
If you had to think that, you'd not get back to the sidewalk very quickly. You can't tell your body to blink however many times a day that it was, or tell your digestive system how to behave. So we understand that our bodies are constantly reacting in situations like that. And it's really helpful if we start to understand that on an emotional level also, that fear, anxiety often come from our body responding first and our brain figuring out what's going on.
Fascinating. So if we're not like these human computers, what the heck are we? What would be a better analogy for what all this is?
Well, it's interesting because so much of the AI stuff that's out now, I talked to a lot of roboticists and people in
Oh,
AI,
wow.
and they were saying that really, AI's huge leap is only going to come when it is embodied, which means when AI has a body, when it's a robot.
Oh my
And there are
goodness.
many
Yeah.
things that robots can do and many things that they still can't. Some of the simplest things for humans to do are the hardest things for robots to do, the way they touch, the way they feel, the sensation that you get when you pick something up. And those are the hardest things. But I think we have to understand that being embodied is really who and what we are. It's what makes us who we are. That we're a great partnership. Our brain and body is a partnership, and we can't try to separate them out.
Absolutely. There are so many juicy, juicy examples and experiments in your book. One that stuck out to me was the light clipboard versus the heavy clipboard when people were given resumes to review. Could you explain what was going on there?
Yeah, didn't you love that one?
That was fascinating. Oh my gosh.
So, evaluating resumes is a bit of a standard psychological experiment. And if
Yeah.
I gave you a resume or two resumes to look at, you'd go, aha, I know she's checking for unconscious bias. I'm going to make sure I'm not influenced by the person's name, by where they live, by their ethnicity. But what you wouldn't think of is the weight of the clipboard that the resume is on. And it turned
Unbelievable.
out that people who were given resumes on a heavy clipboard found the people as being more serious and qualified than the people whose resumes were on a light clipboard. And the
Wow.
best we can understand of this is that our brain is sending a message of heavyweight versus lightweight. We think in metaphors, and your brain is just feeling that, you're evaluating what somebody's resume says, right? You're taking in all sorts of information, and you're not aware that you're also taking in physical information. So that if your body is feeling, oh, this is a heavyweight, this is something serious here, that information is being fed to your brain also.
Wow.
And I just find that stunning and so important to realize.
Unbelievable. Is that similar to there was something in the book where the car door, a heavy or light car door, impacted how you viewed maybe the quality of the car?
Absolutely. Car manufacturers have read that research too. And they
Wow.
realize that people have the sense that heaviness means quality and means something good. And so car doors don't have to be heavy. They can be they're as secure and safe with very lightweight materials. And I don't know if this is still the case, but it used to be the case that car manufacturers would actually put weights in the door so that when you're slamming the door or closing the door in the showroom, it actually has that nice thunk that gives you the sense that there's some quality and strength behind it.
Oh
Where
my
it
God.
all sorts of things.
I wonder if people become, as we become more educated about this stuff, if they'll stop making the car doors so heavy because people won't fall for it anymore, right? Like, interesting to see how a lot of this will change. This is just an example that I've thought of, when somebody goes out and gets a fresh haircut or something or a new hairdo, and then they exude this confidence that wasn't there before, that they probably couldn't think their way to without maybe a physical change. Is that similar to what we're talking about with some of these examples, or how is that different?
No, I think it is. And I think how
Okay.
we look influences how we feel about ourselves also. So I would find, certainly at the beginning when we were all starting to do Zoom calls a few years ago, I would do what everybody else was doing, and I would wear pajama bottoms at the beginning and just the nice shirt on top. And then I quickly realized, or maybe just the first time I did it, even I was about to do it, and I thought, I can't do this. And I ran off and, put on jeans or just a nice pair of pants because I wasn't getting the message that this was serious, and it just felt wrong. And so there's a reason that when you get dressed to go out, you feel a little bit different. It's sending a different message to your body. The materials that you wear send a message. And there are some days you go out and everybody's telling you you look fine, but you feel like, I just look awful today. And maybe it's because your sweater is scratchy or, something is digging into you that's just sending the message that physically it's not right.
Yeah, and I would assume a lot of that is based on our prior conditioning, right? Like, we know that, I don't know, going to school or going to work or something, you're dressed a certain way versus when you're at home watching TV on the couch. And so if you're mixing that up, if you're doing something professional while you're in your pajamas, maybe you're not showing up in the same way.
I think so, absolutely,
Okay.
that it is very much that conditioning of what we expect and how we expect to feel when we have them on. Yes.
Interesting. I'm wondering if, let's say somebody wanted to feel really professional in their pajamas or something for whatever reason, how long would it take for them to recondition their brain and their body that pajamas actually mean it's time to be serious and professional? Do we have that kind of information, how long it takes to uncondition in a way?
That's such a great question, and I think you have just set out a really good research study for for some aspiring young assistant psychology professor to figure out.
Very
Um,
interesting.
because some of it I think is that conditioning, and some of it though is also the physicality of it. So I give another example in the book about that I'm sure you read about sitting on hard chairs versus soft chairs. And one of those young psychology professors who's now at the University of Michigan did that research, and he found that people negotiate harder when they're sitting in a hard chair. He was giving people examples of negotiating for a car, and I think their first offer was turned down, and they had to see how far along they would go in negotiating. And the people who were sitting in hard chairs were much harder about how they would negotiate, what they would accept, how far they would keep pushing than the people in the soft chairs. Now, to me, it's almost just the metaphor of soft chair, soft heart. Or maybe it's that when you're sitting in that hard chair, it feels like something serious is going on. Or maybe your brain is getting the very literal message of edgy. The chair is hard and edgy, and you have to be that also. So I take that in the opposite way, because most of my life is to make people comfortable and happy. So, put pretty pillows around your house. And my dining room chairs happen to be very hard, and I'm always putting pillows on them because I'm just uncomfortable sitting on a hard chair. It just makes me feel better if it's soft. Everybody thinks it's because I'm short that I'm putting the pillow on, but that's a separate story.
So let's say that we were going in to ask our boss for a raise or something like that. We would want to be in a hard chair, but we want them to be in a soft chair potentially, and maybe holding our resume on a very hard clipboard while we're asking for the promotion. So those things might make a little bit of a difference in this meeting, right?
They absolutely would, and it goes even more dramatically than that. And this is a little aside to that, but there was research about college admissions, and this one's a little bit crazy, but they were looking at the weather and how candidates were evaluated on cloudy days and sunny days.
Oh,
And they found that on sunny days, the candidates who were athletic were rated higher. And on cloudy days, the people who had high academics were rated harder. So I think I wrote it as, cloudy days are good for nerds. Now you have no control over what the weather is when the admissions office is reading your child's application.
Right.
But it was so dramatic that I think they said it was something like a 15% difference in the likelihood of being accepted, depending on the weather, on what day your application was being read. So, kids spend thousands of dollars getting tutored for their SATs when something as silly as whether it was raining the day their application was read and they happened to be a physics scholar versus a lacrosse player was in the offing.
Unbelievable. There was also a mention of somebody holding a hot drink, right? Hot coffee or hot tea, that if they were holding it, they were perceiving the other person as being warmer or friendlier, or was it vice versa? Can you explain that one?
Yeah, and that is the mind-blowing one. Actually, that's the one that got me deciding to write this book. That was the first person I interviewed for this book. His name is John Barge. He's a professor at Yale who has done a huge amount of work on embodied cognition. And he did this study where he invited people up to his lab at Yale, and he was volunteers, as psychology experiments always are.
Right.
And they understood that they were going to be evaluating people as to how kind, how warm, how lovely they were. And when they were coming into the lab, an assistant met them downstairs to take them up in the elevator. She actually didn't even know what part she was playing in this experiment, but she was told that she should fumble with some papers. She was holding a cup of coffee, and she should ask the volunteer who was coming up to hold the coffee for her. Sometimes the coffee was hot coffee, and sometimes it was iced coffee. And then they came into the lab and they did what they thought was their experiment, which was to evaluate the people. Well, the people who had been given the warm coffee to hold judged the people they were told about as being much kinder and warmer than the people who were given the iced coffee. And again, it's that sense of our body sending the message of warmth. And your brain has a sense of warmth going on, and somehow misattributes that to the person that you're evaluating. Now, this research has been repeated over and over again in lots of different ways. And studies have actually been found. There was one similar study that found when people felt that they were being excluded, and it was actually just in a computer game. So it was their icon in the computer game was being excluded, not even them. When that happened, they craved something warm afterwards rather than something cold. It was as if they needed to warm themselves from this exclusion that they were feeling. So our bodies are just fascinating in terms of how they're sending these messages and trying to take care of us.
Oh my God, Janice, I feel like I can't ask you questions quick enough, so I'm just going to keep going. There was a mention of treadmills being used in Victorian prisons. Can you explain that situation?
you've ever been on a treadmill, you don't need me to explain. um, yeah, one of the reasons I mentioned that in the book was because I was talking about the need to enjoy and appreciate the exercise that we do, and I think I was talking
Yeah.
about it in terms of the Fitbits and the Apple Watches and all of the things that all of us wear to measure how many steps we're doing every day and how fast we're going, and to measure every moment of what we do.
Yeah.
And if you're a professional athlete, that's great. You absolutely should do that. But I think for most of us, well, we've already learned that 10,000 steps a day means nothing, and it was devised by a Japanese company that was making pedometers about 20 years ago and wanted some nice round number to convince people that they should walk a certain number of steps a day. There was zero scientific research about 10,000 steps. It
Oh
is
my
true that the more
God.
you exercise, if you exercise more, it's better. But when people are driven to walk a certain number of steps a day and counting it, they're very much taking the pleasure away from feeling their bodies exercise. And I think the same thing happens with treadmills, which were indeed used in Victorian prisons, um, that go out for a run, enjoy the beauty of the day, let your mind wander, look at some pretty trees as you go by, and you're going to have a different result from that exercise than if you're on a treadmill, or if you're inside. So I think trying to be in the moment and enjoy the exercise, enjoy your body in the moment, can make a big difference.
I was a collegiate athlete and I hated being in the gym, but I was a rower. So we'd be in the gym, lifting weights and stuff, but then we would be out on the water rowing this boat, which was way better, way more beautiful. But I would much rather go on a walk or a hike or be out in nature than be in the gym, even if technically I'm not getting as much exercise. It's really interesting how the environment plays such a huge role in how I feel about moving my body. I just feel kind of trapped in a gym.
I love that you were a rower. What a great sport, and that
Yeah.
you loved being outside and enjoyed that. And that fits into one of the wasn't an experiment, but research that I found fascinating, which was the value of being near water and
Mm.
the power of water. And there was one researcher out of the UK, his name's Matthew White, and he has done a lot of research on environments. And he found that water is a very powerful environment. And we don't have to be talking about being at the ocean. We can be talking about ponds and streams and lakes. And most places are within some distance, some reasonable distance of a kind of water like that. A lot of cities around the country have reclaimed their waterfronts and made it pretty places to walk and visit. And Professor White found that people who were near water for 2 hours a week, and it didn't have to be all at once, it could be a 2 hour walk one day or half an hour or however much time you must have spent on, on the water as you were out rowing,
Yeah.
dramatically improves people's well-being.
Mm.
And it's true with being outside in general that they refer to it as blue and green spaces, and either one can be very powerful in changing your happiness and your sense of well-being.
Okay, so I have a question for you because I'm a huge bathtub fiend. I love being in the bath. How does that kind of water situation impact happiness? I'm assuming it's very different than being outside by a body of water, but
I'm not sure it's so different, because I
oh,
think part of it is that there is a fascination to water, and water is constantly changing, right? It moves. They refer to it as a soft fascination. So with water, there's always something to look at. And there's always something that changes, but just slightly. So it's not changing so much that you have to pay attention, but it's changing enough to keep you interested. And that seems to be the perfect way to allow you to be creative, to think, to come up with new ideas, because there's this background of interest going on, but it's not interfering with your mind. So it's calming and it's also inspiring. So your baths may be the source of your inspiration.
I love it. Okay, that's what I'm gonna tell my husband. This is why I spend 3 hours in the bath every night. Janice told me to. There is this kind of, I guess, correlation between tasting menus and what your body has in common with that. Could you explain that concept a little bit?
Yeah, that is the fun one. Learning about food for this book was really fascinating. So there are two different parts to it, but I'll start with the tasting menus idea, which is that our brains, much as however wonderful they are basically lazy and they want to do as little as possible. And so they're perfectly happy to just kind of not pay a lot of attention to things. But as soon as you do something new or there's a different experience, your brain perks up. It has to, because it could be a danger, right? And so we're wired for that. If there's something new, your brain has to pay attention. Since we're not really worried about tigers jumping out at us anymore, oftentimes when our brain is paying attention, it's just waking up. And that just is a good feeling for us. And it's an exciting feeling for us.
Yeah.
So the same thing happens with food. Our brains seem to desire many different tastes. And that may go back to the idea that, if you eat many different foods, it's probably nutritionally better for you. But if you keep eating the same food, you're going to get tired of it and not pay attention to it. The person I interviewed about this gave the example of eating a chocolate mousse. So you take your first taste of chocolate mousse, and it is wonderful. You can't believe how delicious this chocolate mousse is. It's a 10. Then you take your second taste, also still pretty good, a 10. Third taste, starting to get a little used to it, we're down to 9. Keeps going. By the time you're at the bottom of the bowl, your brain's not paying attention anymore. Your taste buds aren't paying attention anymore. You're pretty much at a 1. And according to this professor, our pleasure in a meal isn't the sum total of the tastes, it's the average of them. So if you stopped after taste 4 when you were at 10, 10, 9, 9, you have a 9.5 on that meal. If you go all the way down to the 1 and you average it out, maybe that chocolate mousse is now at a 5 of pleasure. And so it's a really great way to think about it, to realize that eating a smaller portion of something isn't just to make you healthier or thinner. It actually gives you a lot more pleasure because you have the absolute excitement and joy of that taste, and it never gets boring. Your taste buds don't get bored, your brain doesn't get bored. And so you're left thinking, that was a great chocolate mousse. And what I joke about in the book is that I think that the chefs at very, very expensive tasting menus, at very expensive restaurants who have tasting menus, get away with a lot because they give you just a teeny portion of something. And so you perk up when you taste it and you have 2 bites of it. And there's nothing you don't like in 2 bites. It's just like, oh, that's really interesting.
Right.
And then it gets taken away before you can go like, I didn't really actually like that. But interesting is the first thing that you experience, a pleasure of something new, the excitement of something new. It wakes you up. And then it gets whisked off and something else is brought along. And so eating small portions of lots of different things is going to be much more satisfying and ultimately much more healthy for you too. It's also a good way to get yourself to cut down on eating huge portions. If when you have that big bowl of ice cream or chocolate mousse, you remind yourself, it's not that I'm trying to lose weight, it's that I'm trying to be really happy. And I will be happiest if I only eat a little bit of this.
So these upscale restaurants that serve tiny little portions, they've known about this.
I think they actually do understand that a
Wow.
small portion is a pleasure. Any small
Right.
portion of something, and obviously the food is special, but that small portion is the pleasure, whereas a huge amount can just be less enjoyable.
So does that also mean that us as individuals, we like a little bit of everything too, as far as lots of variety, whether it's hobbies or environments, or like how would that maybe correlate to just our body mind connection?
It correlates very much. And I think if you're
Okay.
having a bad day or you're in a slump, one of the best things you can do for yourself is try something new. And it's not a bad idea to try to do that on a regular basis. When you're driving to the grocery store, you probably drive the same way every time. Go down a different street, take a slightly different direction, go to a farmer's market and buy a fruit that you've never tasted before and taste that fruit. It doesn't have to be an exotic vacation. Those certainly help too. And those get you excited. And by the way, that is why we always remember our vacations better than what we did last Tuesday, because it was something new. It was something different, and our brains and our bodies experience it and our brains encode it differently. But we can take advantage of that on a small basis to have those new experiences whenever possible.
Love that. The concept of novelty. I know for me personally, let's say that if I'm about to go try a new restaurant, there's this excitement around this new experience I'm about to have. But let's say I'm about to start a new job, that kind of novelty gives anxiety. So what is going on there? Because there's obviously this range of feelings that you can experience around something new. Can we trigger ourselves to feel a little bit more positive even about the scarier stuff?
Great question. And newness, it gets your body and mind alert
Right.
because you don't know what's going to be there. You don't know if it's going to be the tiger behind the tree. And so that is the cause of that, what you're describing as an anxiety that you might feel if you're starting a new job.
Right.
One of the things I really loved as I was doing the research was to realize how we can use our bodies to think about that differently. So you're starting a new job tomorrow, or you're going in to ask your boss for a raise, or you're about to give a toast at your best friend's wedding, and you get those signs of anxiety in your body. You get that pounding heart, let's say, and
Yeah.
those sweaty palms. And if you try to tell yourself, no, no, I'm calm. This is fine. I am perfectly calm about starting this new job. Your brain's not buying it. Your brain's
Right.
just not buying it because it's going, sorry, your heart is pounding, your hands are sweaty, you are not calm. But think about what are the other emotions that accompany those same symptoms. Well, excitement, right? When you're excited about something, you have those same physical symptoms. So if you do that little tweak and you say, I'm not scared about starting this job tomorrow, but I'm so excited. It's something new for me to be doing, and I'm so excited to see what it's going to be like. I'm not scared about talking to my boss for a raise. I'm really excited to present to him all the good work that I've done and let him or her know why I'm excited to be here and deserve to be given a promotion or whatever it may be.
Right.
And that really works well. So changing that sense of perceiving that what you have is anxiety to perceiving it as excitement allows your body and mind to be in sync, but for your mind to perceive something good going on rather than potentially negative.
I love that you've debunked a lot of myths in this book as well, and one of them is this concept of us having to blow off steam. Can you explain why that's not the case? That we might not be needing that.
Right. Well, I found out about that when somebody was telling me about a rage rooms in Las Vegas, and I guess they have them all over the country now because I've found them in
Yes.
Brooklyn and New York and 100 other places. And the concept is that if you're upset, you go into this room and there's old crockery or often it's old electronic equipment, and they give you a bat or whatever, and you can bang things and you can break things. And the idea is, as you just said, you blow off steam and you feel better and you've gotten rid of all of this aggression.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? It's completely the opposite.
Oh my, of course. Of course.
Because if your body is tensed and aggressive and banging things and worked up, what do you think your mind is doing? Your brain is going, okay, got to get revved up here. Something bad's going on. He's hitting things. We must be angry. And so really you're getting more and more upset. You're not, there's no such thing as blowing off steam. We're not teapots. And and so if you're going to one of these rage rooms or whatever with a group of friends and it's just as a joke and to have fun, that's fine. That's not a problem.
Right.
But if you're doing it because you think it will be therapeutic, understand that it's actually doing exactly the opposite. And I tell the story in the book of of actually somebody I know who was in therapy for a very long time, and he had one of these. This was actually a therapy that was used 30, 40 years ago, and I was very surprised to hear somebody was still doing it. It was the punch the pillow.
Right.
Think of this person this family member who had been cruel to you, and punch the pillow thinking of them. And he described how doing this over and over again, made him cry, and he realized that this must have been so cathartic. And I didn't have the heart to say, no, it wasn't cathartic. You were just reliving the anger and despair. You weren't getting rid of it. You were experiencing it all over again. And
Wow.
so what we want to do is turn the heat down. when we're upset about something, we don't want to get ourselves more riled. It's not just letting off steam or exploding. It's
Right.
turn it down, find a way to get calmer, find a way for your body to send the message that, okay, I'm back in control here. I'm okay. And then your mind is able to deal with the issues in a more rational way.
Interesting. So instead of going to a rage room, if you're really angry, what would be a good alternative to that of this concept of actually turning the steam down a little bit?
Go for a walk. Go
Yeah.
outside in nature. Take a bath.
Yes.
Something that's going to give you that sense of soft fascination where there's that something calming and pleasant around. If you don't have water to go to, get one of those little waterfalls that you can buy for $30 and put on your side table. Just something that will give you a sense of an ability to make yourself calm down and appreciate the things that are around you a little bit in a very physical way.
Mm. Let's say that somebody what goes to get their aggression out in some way and they do feel some kind of release after. Are we thinking that's probably just the physical activity or physical exercise around the event that they could probably get from maybe going on a run or a hike or something like that?
They're getting their bodies more revved up, and there's a pleasure to that. It just
Sure.
feels good, as you said, with if you go for a run, sometimes it feels good to be very revved up and to have that physical sense. But is that doing anything for the emotional issue or for the anxiety that you're feeling or the tension or stress that you're feeling? Absolutely not.
Mm.
It's doing quite
Gotcha.
the opposite. It's ultimately making you more stressed because your body is now revved up rather than calmed down.
I gotcha. So it's almost like that maybe you're recovering from that adrenaline spike. There was a mention of the different type of stressors that we have and how stress can actually be a helpful resource for us. Could you share a little bit about that information in the book?
Yeah, we do tend to think of stress as being all bad,
Right.
but stress is also a way of saying something is important. And if you can, as I was saying before about changing the anxiety to excitement, if you can change that sense of I'm stressed because I'm going to do badly to I'm stressed because this is important and I should be a little bit excited, revved up, charged for this. That's not a
Mhm.
bad thing. And there was a study that was done, and I believe it was with people taking their boards for business school, whatever those are called. And they were given practice exams a few months earlier, and half of them went through the process of learning that stress can be a good thing, that you possibly function better when you're under stress because you're paying attention, you're alert, your body is ready to do its best. And they actually did considerably better on the practice tests than the people who hadn't been given that information about how to deal with the stress they were feeling. And they followed them when they took the real tests a few months later. And it continued that the people who had that understanding of, okay, stress can be a good thing, actually did better on the actual exams too.
Gosh, this is so interesting. I have maybe just a couple personal questions for you about your body of work. You've written many books. Do you have a favorite book, or is always like the new one the new favorite?
Yeah, the new one always is the new favorite.
Okay.
I was looking back at some of the talks that I've given on a previous book, and I saw one of them I had started, and I won't even tell you which book it was, by saying like, as writers, we're not allowed to have favorites, but just between us, it was this one, and I always feel that about the new book that I'm writing because it's exciting to. I love doing the research. I love learning the new things. And so maybe it's part of what we were talking about. My brain and body get stimulated by something new. And
Yeah.
so I get excited by that.
What is your favorite example or concept from the book that you wrote about gratitude?
Gratitude was actually a wonderful book to write. And gratitude, as I said, I think the main takeaway for me of that was how gratitude can actually give you control. Because I think one of the things that happens is that we're upset about something, there's a bad event that happens, and we just feel out of control. Something bad just happened to me. And
Mhm.
what gratitude does is it says, you don't have to wait for good events to happen. You can look for the good in anything. And when I was writing this book, that was very powerful to me. And I would find that I would sometimes physically make myself stop if I was upset about something. I remember a particular day, it was raining. I was walking down the street. A bus came by and covered me with water. And, I'm just like so upset about everything. And I just kind of stopped and I said, okay, you're the gratitude lady. You're not allowed to get to get angry on street corners. Um, just stay here and think about why this situation is okay. You can always come up with one thing that, even I think what I said to myself that day was, at the time I was in New York City. I said, I'm in New York City because that's where I want to be. And I'm excited to be in New York City. And yeah, I'm here and I have to put up with buses getting me covered with water, but I'm really grateful that I get to live here. And, it just giving yourself that power to turn a situation around. And I found I did a lot of, I gave a lot of talks about the Gratitude Diaries, did a lot of traveling with it. And I understood that when I wrote the Gratitude Diaries, it was a way of making my life go from good to better. I've had a nice life. I don't pretend in any way otherwise. But I had so many people come up to me after my talks and tell me about truly horrific experiences they had had with health, with suicides of family members, with cancer, with deaths, and talking about how using gratitude had helped them get through the hard times. And I was so moved by that and realized the power of that, because if you're going through a horrible time, you have no choice except to wake up tomorrow morning and put your feet down and step forward. And if you can make yourself step forward with some sense of a glimmer of hope, or with some sense of stopping and saying, there's got to be some sunshine in this situation. And what is it? And how can I find it? It doesn't make the bad stuff go away, but it certainly makes it a little bit easier to deal with.
The idea of gratitude as a way to take your power back, I think that is so cool. And I will use the kind of the gratitude in moments where I feel like I really need it, where I can catch myself in some kind of negative thought loop. And then I have to kind of recalibrate by thinking about what I'm grateful for. But I'm not somebody that does like a daily gratitude before I start my day. It, for me personally, doesn't feel like it holds as much weight as in the moments I really, really need it. Have you found that one seems more beneficial to the other, or do you think that it's really a personalized situation when it comes to a gratitude practice? I'm just curious about any research that you have about it.
Well, I'm in your school.
Okay.
I do think it's very personal. And when I started the book, I started by keeping a gratitude journal, and it didn't last all that long. And a lot of people who I speak to, I mean, I do have one friend who's kept a gratitude journal for 17 years. I guess that was a couple of years
Wow.
ago. It's probably been 20 by now. But I think most people get tired of that. And the one thing you don't want is for gratitude to become a chore. You don't want it to be something that you have to do. I have to
Yes.
wake up this morning and be grateful. But I think once you get into the mindset of that, it's exactly as you're describing, that you can use it in the moments that you need it. And I find it particularly powerful with my family, with my husband, that it's so easy for us to get upset at the people we most love. And if you can, in those moments, make yourself stop and think, there's a reason I'm here. There's what, and
Yeah.
remember the positives, which we find very easy to forget, and focus on those. I think that can make a big difference in a relationship.
Definitely. I mean, we've covered quite a few already, but is there anything else that you think our listeners today could maybe apply to their daily life that could be really beneficial for them?
Sure. I think the idea of using some of those, we were just talking about gratitude in terms of changing your mindset in the
Yeah.
moment. And the new book allows you to do that with your body, which makes it even easier. So, one of the
Mm.
things I discovered is that if you sit up straight or you stand up straight, you are much more able to access positive emotions. There's a lot
Oh.
of research that finds that, when you're depressed, you kind of naturally slouch. And so your brain starts to identify being slouched with being unhappy. And put yourself in a slouched position. You will find it very easy to think of something negative. Make yourself sit up straight, stand up straight, and you access more positive feelings. So that's a real easy one. When you're feeling bad, most of the time stop and you'll realize, oh yeah, I am slouched over. Just stop, sit up straight, give a little smile, even if it's a complete fake one, because that's something else, which is that There's a lot of research about it's called the facial feedback hypothesis, which says that our brain is constantly checking the muscles in our face to see how we feel. If your face is in a smile, feels positive. If it's in a frown, feels negative. So little things like that can make a difference. We've talked about nature. Bring flowers into your house. It doesn't have to be expensive. Get a bunch at the grocery store. Huge amount of research showing that flowers, for a whole variety of reasons, flowers make people feel happier. And we talked about, drink something warm that can make you feel better. So lots of little things like that can make a big difference.
Love those. A lot of people voice their unsatisfaction around their job. And is there anything in a work environment, obviously not everything's in our control, but some things are. Is there anything in a work environment that you have found to be beneficial for people to uplift them a little bit more?
Many work environments are set up to be as bad as can be,
Yeah.
that don't have natural light, that don't let people walk around, that don't have high ceilings. So if you can get out sometimes, if you can take a walk, if you can get outside, I think that can help. In terms of thinking about it, and I talked about this in the gratitude diaries, I think it really helps to have a perspective on your job, because we get caught in the moment in a job. We get so involved with who just said what, who criticized me, what just happened, I had to work too hard today. And I often tell particularly younger people, think about how you're going to feel about this job a year from now. And so, here you are. You have this great podcast. I'm sure you have terrible days that are irritating and somebody drives you crazy and you're really upset about it. And if you can make yourself think, how am I going to feel about this a year from now? And you'll think, a year from now, I'm going to look back and go, isn't it amazing that I had this fabulous podcast and that I had these great listeners and I was able to bring interesting people and talk to people? You'll remember the good. We always remember the good when we're looking back. And so if instead of only having positivity in the rearview mirror, we can give ourselves that perspective to get out of the misery of the day and have the perspective that we'll have a year from now, it can also help in a difficult job situation.
I tend to do that for myself. I just zoom out, ask myself, will this small thing I'm annoyed about or something matter in 3 years, 5 years? No. So why don't I just let it not matter now? If I know that I'm already going to get to that place. I also heard that even just the sound of birds or something for a few seconds a day can help somebody's well-being. So if you are maybe stuck inside of an office that you don't like, maybe even listening to something that feels like you're out in nature could be helpful. I'm curious to know if you have a favorite quote, whether it's something that you wrote or just something else from your life that you're inspired by.
Well, Oscar Wilde has a funny line that I used actually to start the book. He said, "Those who see any difference between soul and body have neither." So I kind of like that idea. Our souls, our bodies, we are a mix of everything. And I like to think of it that way.
Oh, I love that. Any final thoughts that you want to share with people? And then where can people find your work, your books, all that good stuff?
The final thought is that it was a pleasure to talk to you. This was really fun. Thank you. The book is What Your Body Knows About Happiness. It's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, whatever your local bookstore is. And it's fun. And it has lots of enjoyable moments and lots of good information that I think people will like. My website is just janicekaplan.com. And please come, tell me what you think about the book. There's a place to contact me. And I love to hear from people and hear their stories.
Well, those fun facts are just gonna stick in my brain forever. Wow, I feel like we all got, some really good little party tricks. If you ever need a fun conversation starter, just whip out some bullet points from this episode. Also, please tell me if you put any of these things to use. I would love to hear how it goes. All right, everybody, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon. So glad you tuned into Self-Helpless. If you felt supported by this or past episodes, there are a couple ways you can help the show. Feel free to share it with a friend who may enjoy the variety of discussions we have here. Also, you can become a monthly or annual supporter of the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/selfhelpless. That's where you can pitch and vote on topics, submit questions for special guests, or be a silent supporter and not participate in any of that. 100% of Patreon and merch proceeds go directly to operating operating expenses that not only keep the show going through thick and thin, but also keeps it accessible to all with minimal ads. If you want to show a little extra love in, you can leave an Apple Podcast review or send an email to share how Self-Helpless has impacted you. All of this info and more goodies can be found at selfhelplesspodcast.com. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.